everybody loves her, partly because she has a genius for making each person that she talks to, whoever it is, or group of people, she makes them feel that they are the one and only person she wants to be talking to.
This week, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, visited Kent and East Sussex. And wherever she went, they came in their thousands to welcome her. Queen Elizabeth was installed as Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports in August 1979. It's an historic office once responsible for the defence of the Channel coast and dates back to the 11th century. At the inauguration, she said quite simply, "It's been the happiest day of my life." Among her predecessors were Churchill and Sir Robert Menzies. Lady Longford is her biographer.
She's the first woman to hold that position, which has usually been reserved for statesmen or generals or admirals and so on. But she's shown she can do these things as well as any man, if not better.
With her for the installation, she brought 3 grandchildren, 60 mounted troopers from the Household Cavalry, and more than 1,000 other representatives from the armed forces. The Royal Yacht Britannia was dressed overall in Dover's Prince of Wales dock, and the Red Arrows gave a spectacular display to mark a splendid occasion. This time, her tour began dramatically. At Ramsgate and Margate, her first ports of call, the people waited and worried. It turned out her helicopter had developed a fault, and so the Queen Mother had to travel to Heathrow and then on to RAF Manston. In the end, the morning's engagements were cancelled.
Well, we feel very disappointed because there's been such a lot of work put into it, you know, and everyone seems disappointed, especially the school children.
But some people weren't too sure what they were going to say to her anyway. Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was born at St Paul's, Waldenbury in Hertfordshire. She was the 9th child of the 14th Earl and Countess of Strathmore. To find a drop of non-British blood in her veins, you have to go back to the 17th century. She grew up at Glamis Castle in Scotland.
Her mother told her daughter when she was quite little, she said to her, "Never look down, never look at your feet." And I think that had a kind of inner meaning, and it certainly was very useful to somebody who was going to become queen, though of course neither of them dreamt it. Being very near the end of an extremely big family, enormous family for these days, 10 children, did give her a feeling of warmth and of other people and an inhabited world, whereas King George VI, a very wonderful king whom she married, had had exactly the opposite feeling. Though he came of not a very small family, it was inhibited. They weren't able to show their affection for each other, though they felt it. But she was exactly the opposite. She could always show her feelings.
The courtship of the man she was to marry began when they met at a children's party, and she gave the shy 10-year-old Prince Bertie the cherries off the top of her cake. She was 5. In April 1923, at Westminster Abbey, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon became Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of York. The wedding cake was 9 feet high, and the new Duchess developed whooping cough on her honeymoon. Throughout their lives, the royal couple were to travel the Commonwealth and the world, to South Africa, for instance.
One of the Boers that she met said, "We're very pleased to welcome you here, ma'am, but I'm afraid I can't forget that England once conquered us." And she said, "I can well understand that. We feel very much the same thing in Scotland."
They had 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret Rose. Their family life was happy. But this tranquility was soon to be shattered. King Edward, who was as yet uncrowned, had fallen in love with Wallis Simpson, and by the end of 1936, he had abdicated. His younger brother was to be king now.
Suddenly they were catapulted into a totally different life for which he felt he was unprepared. As it turned out, he was very well prepared. And of course, she was the most marvellous queen consort, the most popular one we've ever known.
King George and Queen Elizabeth were crowned in 1937. Lord Hume remembers.
King George the Sixth was rather a shy person and hadn't anticipated he would be king. And so his queen gave him enormous help at that time. And it did, as I say, it was a deep shock to Parliament all through the country. And I think that the two of them managed to rally opinion so quickly. It was marvelous.
I wouldn't say she's a very decisive person. She's too sensitive. She's too aware of the possibilities, what other people are thinking, what can be done. But he, as the monarch, saw straight, directly ahead what had to be done, and therefore she lent on him every bit as much as he lent emotionally on her.
Throughout her life, people have known her as a caring queen. This was Tenterton on Wednesday.
It gives me a great pleasure to unveil this night to mark the inauguration of a special coach designed to accommodate the disabled.
Royal variety performer Danny LaRue.
I look at her as a wonderful mother first, because that's what she is to the nation. I think she's the mum of the nation, and when one travels around a lot, and I've done several royal shows, 3 shows for the Queen Mum, and it's always a joy because she's so enthusiastic and her knowledge is so wonderful, and it's so warm. She's a lovely, cosy woman. You think that she'd like to get her shoes off and put her slippers on and have a little chat.
Lid, Wednesday. Children flocked to see her wherever she went. 600 of them lined the streets, hoping for a glimpse of their royal visitor. And in Folkestone, where she opened an extension to a Church of England school, the welcome was more than enthusiastic. It's perhaps through the eyes of small children that we see the most vivid and charming pictures. Do you think she wears a crown all the time?
No. No.
When does she wear it?
On special occasion, when she sits in her royal chair and that. She doesn't go out and wear it in the garden when she plants flowers and that.
Why doesn't she wear it in the garden?
She might get dirty.
Do you think you'd like to go and stay with her?
Yes.
What would you do if you went to stay with her?
And I'd play with the dogs and help take dogs for a walk.
She's got some dogs, has she?
Yes.
Yeah. What sort of dogs are they? Do you know? Little dogs, big dogs?
I don't know. There's big dogs and little dogs. In there. She said colts. It's corporate dogs.
Wouldn't it be corgis, maybe?
Yeah.
Does she live in London?
Yes, she does, but that's where she goes for holidays. No, she goes up to, she lives in London, and, where does she go for holidays?
The people of Dover throng the battered streets as the King and Queen arrive at the town hall during their visit to Hellfire Corner. Though the royal visit is a surprise for Dover, the King and Queen are given a tremendous ovation.
At the end of the war, the King and Queen toured the country to thank their people. They had stayed in London throughout the war, refusing to be evacuated to the relative safety of Windsor.
On the seafront, their Majesties see for the first time the famous cave shelters, for so long the home of Dover's people during their terrible ordeal so recently and dramatically ended.
The royal family, too, had had their wartime casualties. The young Duke of Kent had died when his plane had crashed early in the war.
And so the King and Queen, who expressed their admiration for the courage and endurance of the people of Hellfire Corner, left amid the cheers of a happy and heroic crowd.
She was there always with the people. I was a child, and I remember when I was in London before I was evacuated to Devon, you'd see her, she'd be walking through the bomb damage. She went to the people, and they've never forgotten for it.
I can't remember a week when, you know, she wasn't with the King on some bombed site and talking to the people who just the night before had lost their homes and maybe even some of their friends and relatives.
And even Buckingham Palace didn't escape the German bombs.
It was bombed 9 times altogether, quite amazing. But the first time it was very severely bombed, and the King and Queen had a very narrow escape. They'd managed to get out of the room, which was so badly blasted, but they were very shaken. But she said, "I'm glad we have been bombed. Now I feel I can look the East End in the face."
This week, Her Majesty has lived on board the Royal Yacht Britannia, and everything seemed to go smoothly wherever she went. But royal walkabouts in the past have had their surprises.
Suddenly the Queen Mother saw an enormous Zulu, as she thought, charging, and she raised her parasol and fended him off to save her daughters and husband. Of course, it turned out afterwards that he was trying to present a 10-shilling note to Princess Elizabeth for her 21st birthday.
Yet the constant demands of duty were taking their toll on the King's health. After one foreign tour, he'd lost 17 pounds in weight, and gradually his illnesses became more and more serious. In 1951, millions received his Christmas broadcast, listening with sadness to a certain looming inevitability in his weary voice. By February 1952, George VI was dead. 3 queens mourned him.
I think she has a very deep religious sense. I would almost go as far as calling it a mystical sense. What I mean is, I think she feels in touch with higher powers and greater sources than ordinary material life. And I think when she's desperately down, as she was after the death of her husband, she did have this strength to draw on. I think Princess Margaret was a marvellous companion to her because they were both living in Clarence House, and of course Princess Margaret missed her father immensely, and the Queen missed her husband.
Well, I think that there was a moment when she felt she might not be wanted, and certainly she wouldn't have wanted, so to speak, to get in the way of the new Queen. But on the contrary, of course, the new Queen wanted a lot of help, and there it was whenever she wanted it, but the Queen Mother was never obtrusive. What I think helped to bring her back into life is that she realized that people wanted her.
It was also her love for Scotland and the outdoor life. She rescued a tiny castle from demolition, the Castle of May. Here there was time for the interest that had had to take second place for so long.
She taught Prince Charles fly fishing. She gave him his great interest in going over in steeple chasing.
She'd always loved horses, and as she started to rebuild her life, her fascination with racing grew.
The great interest in racing began with the Queen Mother and Princess Elizabeth, as she then was, together, owning a horse jointly, Monaveen. And in fact, she now has well over 300 winners on her record, which is quite marvellous.
One of her jockeys was Terry Biddlecombe.
No, I was lucky to ride lots of good horses for her. Not many winners, 7 or 8, but it was a great thrill for me. And she knew more about the form in breeding the horses than which I did. And I used to breed a few, and she knew everything. You go in the paddock and she said, "Oh, you got this one to beat and that one to beat." I mean, tremendous. Couldn't believe it. And what I liked about her was after the race, you get off the horse, and maybe if you won, and she wouldn't come and say, "Well done," immediately. She'd go to the lad who sort of led it up and done all the hard work at home. And this is sort of the the things she used to sort of enjoy about life, I mean, the people who'd done the grafting. And then she turned to me and said, well, how did he go?
I think that's one of her secrets of eternal youth, that she's never allowed herself to dwindle away, whatever the temptations to sit back. She's always been active and energetic.
Queen Elizabeth is now in her 80s, and yet the pace has slowed down very little on her royal tours. On Wednesday, she went to Lydd and then on to Rye, and in the afternoon, she travelled on the Kent and East Sussex Railway. And despite her early experience in the week, she was back in a helicopter again. As well as the young in the Cinque Ports this week, she also met many elderly people in Canterbury.
Well, what do you think keeps her going?
Willpower, I suppose, for one thing, must do, mustn't it? And, well, all the people love her, and I think that helps to get along, you know.
She's so natural, she mixes amongst everybody. She's one of us, isn't she?
I would like to congratulate most warmly all those who, by their generosity, devotion and skill, have made possible the building of this hospice.
Two years ago was her 80th birthday, and the nation celebrated.
Still, at 80, she is apparently as full of enthusiasm for life as she was when she was a much younger person, and you only had to look at the streets to see that the young recognize this too. So they respond to somebody who is so infectiously happy and so glad to see them.
Faversham, later that day. Michael Noakes has painted many members of the royal family for state occasions, official commissions, and just purely private requests. And in recent years, he's painted Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, 4 times.
If you're with somebody, you know, even a royal person, if you're with somebody for an hour plus at a time, quite quickly the sort of shaggy dog stories, perhaps with a painterly connection or a royal connection, start creeping in. And she laughs at all the right moments, so that's nice. Once when I was painting, the sittings were dragged out over a fairly long patch, and the fur trimmings on her coat sort of went into storage at one point, and handbags sort of changed character and became sort of larger, or winter bags rather than summer bags and so on. And one day when I was working with her, the wrong bag had come down into the room, and she was bothered by this and said, well, do you want me to? And I said, let's wait, ma'am, till we have a rest, and then perhaps we can organize it. And the time came for a rest, and I said, Your Majesty, now, what about the bag? Can I? And I went towards the bell, you see, to ask the steward perhaps to arrange that somebody should fetch the bag. But Queen Elizabeth came to the wrong conclusion, and she said, oh, no, you can't get it. You won't know where it is. And you... So she went and got it herself.
She tells lovely stories, and she loves charades. She acts them out very well, and I think there's the actress in her. I think, yes, I think she'd have been a marvelous actress. Lovely. Great comedienne, I would imagine.
She has a sense of performance, but not in any artificial sense, not theatrical in a bad sense, but because she feels it's her duty to put forward what she stands for in the most effective way. And so she does it dramatically. She would flower in a full life where it was possible to have colour and music, dancing. She loves dancing, even now, still. I think it's wonderful. I think there's a very interesting parallel, at least in one way, one can see between Lady Diana Spencer, as she was, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, as she was. Both of them came into the royal family from the outside, not the outside, if you see what I mean. They belonged to the same branches of the aristocracy. In other words, they understood what the royal system was all about. At the same time, they knew the outside world as well. And this, I think, was a great advantage to them, and therefore there may be a parallel there.
What sort of a granny do you think she is? She's a granny, isn't she?
Yes, yes.
And what does she do as a granny?
She looks after a child if Prince Charles and Lady Diana's gone out. If Prince Charles and Lady Diana go out for their honeymoon, she might get very, very lonely, and she's got to look after the baby, because babies can't go to the honeymoon.
Wonderful lady. Absolutely wonderful. Always got a little smile, a little spark about her. She's the most beautiful lady.
She is a joy to work to, and she giggles. She's got a lovely giggle. The last time was 79, and then I had the great joy of being with Gracie, the late Gracie, who was also then. I have a marvellous picture of the three of us, which I treasure. Well, that's a lovely word. I think she's a treasure. She's a real treasure and adored. Adored abroad as much as here. A great ambassadress for this country, and a lovely mum.